Callista, thank you so much for being here. Hello.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I love to be here today.
Can you tell us about the inspiration behind the poetry collection, Wrap in a Big White Towel, and how your personal life experiences have shaped your writing?
Sure. Well, that's really kind of a tall order in a way because there's a lot of life experiences there. But I think really, I came to poetry really late. My whole life was spent in education. So there was a lot of writing, but not specifically poetry. But I loved poetry. As a child, we were immersed in poetry. My father loved poetry. They were readers in my family. But I was lucky enough to attend a workshop not all that long ago with Lorna Crozier, who comes to this neck of the woods to a really remote little off the grid retreat and does these wonderful poetry workshops where she works with poets at all stages in small groups and just shares her generous knowledge and experience. So that kind of sparked me. And I began at first to just write poems about things that I remembered. Memory was a large part of it. And it struck me so much that in writing poetry, you really go from kind of a cognitive state where you're remembering something and you're thinking about it to an affective domain where you really are trying to wring all the feelings that you had at the time when that memory was made. I love that. I love that language is that vehicle that gets you from cognition to affect. And then, after a while, I began to realize that then there was another link to be made too, because we write to communicate. It should, you hope, arouse a feeling in a reader. So that was kind of a journey. It kind of suits with my life in education as well, because it does deal with cognition and affect. I just, it changed my life though, that that workshop with Lorna Crozier, because now I feel completely immersed in poetry and spend a lot of time doing it. So, my life has really changed that way.
And your poetry, it often explores themes of grief, memory, like we were just talking about, and gratitude. How do you approach these really complex feelings in your work?
Oddly enough, I ended up at that workshop because my friend who owns that retreat area met me in a coffee shop very soon after I lost my sister unexpectedly to cancer. And she said, "You have to come to this workshop." And I think the first poem where I really went into um, uh, the feelings about my sister was a poem called Fugue, which is in here. And it is interesting because fugue is a flight poem. It translates to I flee, I fly. So I use language to show how to escape from a feeling sometimes in a way. Like distract yourself with other things. Think of everything else. Don't think of this grief that's right in front of you here. Then I really started to try to get into the notion of feeling. And I think it really goes back to memory, what you can remember when that moment occurred, what happened. And then, to make it interesting for others, to make it matter to others, I think it often ends up being an image of something. So all of those things kind of flow together. But the poems don't flow off the pen, believe me, they are worked.
I want to kind of go on back to just my last question. Your poetry has been recognized by these awards and nominations, including the Gwendolyn McEwen Poetry Prize. How does it feel to receive this recognition, and does it impact your writing process at all?
Well, it feels marvelous. It really does. But then it is balanced by many, many rejections. And I think every poet knows that. The Gwendolyn McEwen one was a it was a suite of poems, and it was about it was. I'm going to make it sound boring. I don't think it's boring, but it was about my grandfather who was a Great Lakes captain, and he captained a ship in the Great Storm of, it was 1913. My mother was 2 years old, and he drowned, and his crew drowned, and everyone they lost, upwards of 250 ships that night in that storm. It's kind of like a Edmund Fitzgerald storm, but it was more on Lake. This part of it was on Lake Huron, and that was the suite that was a finalist in the Gwendolyn McEwen contest. And so my feeling about that was, I was just very proud of that story. So I was proud of those poems in a kind of a different way, because they reflected something. They reflected my grandfather, who of course I never knew, and my mother didn't even ever know, but she always thought of him as a heroic character. And I thought, if Mom read this suite, she would really like it.
Well, thank you so, so much for sitting down with me today.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to talk to you. And it's really it's the first interview I've had. And I'm very, very honored. And I think of you in Calgary. I mean, that's far away from here. And yet here we are chatting as if we're in the same room. I look forward to being in Calgary next week.